You're listening to Make the Game with Matt Hackett.
Welcome to Make the Game. My name is Matt Hackett. Come hang out with me and Sherveen as we chat about his game Midautumn and GDC talk growing your code library with each new project. Let's jump right in. What games are you playing recently, or otherwise, doing for fun?
Ooh, what games am I playing recently? I've been really slowly playing Floppy Knights. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Floppy
It's
Knights.
just like a little like turn-based game with like card-based, like kind of turn-based moving units around kind of game. And
Okay.
it's kind of like relaxing. So I've just been playing like one mission every now and then, like once a week or something like that. I'm
Love
really
that.
spacing it out. Yeah, I'd say that's what I'm doing at the moment, mainly.
Mainly. That's great. Is it like 5 minute sessions, or is it like, do you have a preference for like tight, small sessions or longer sessions?
Oh, I think it really depends. I do a lot of like really, really small, like playing things for like 5 minutes. And then sometimes I'll try and do like longer things. I remember checking out like Witch Strandings, which is Oliver Nelson's game pretty recently, which is like the Strand type game that he made with a bunch of
Hmm.
folks. So I tried that out,
Cool.
and that was like I appreciated that it was short, so you got to kind of like experience the kind of whole thesis of the game in like in a few hours.
Awesome.
Tried that race recently, and then I think I've been also playing a little bit of like some of the Yakuza games just on Game Pass, and just trying them out and just like wandering around, not really getting much done, but just doing that like as downtime and things like that.
Yeah, I enjoyed a bunch of memes going around recently about those games. A lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I
No,
mean, to get back
definitely.
around to those. That's really cool. Yeah, I'm actually working on a Witch game, so I'll have to check out Witch Stranding. That's a great tip. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no, it's a really cool, like they're doing a lot of really interesting stuff with like the way you use your mouse cursor. And it's yeah, so it's very interesting kind of like
Ooh,
vibe. It's a very interesting vibe to it,
I'm
is all I
intrigued.
can say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll have to
It's
check that out.
I think you could go either way. I could imagine it not being for everyone. So I think but it was a lot of fun to just kind of see, especially when you like kind of know folks who are working on it. It's fun to see like the thought process that goes into it.
Oh, yeah,
I think
yeah.
a lot of the time I play games now, I just like to be like, oh, I bet this is what they were kind of thinking about, and it's more fun that way to kind of
Have,
like live vicariously through folks.
yes. Have you found that as true for you, or like, do you have a harder time enjoying games sometimes because you pick apart how they're made?
Yeah, no, I was talking about that with someone earlier. I find that's the hardest for me with large kind of like AAA games. I find myself like deconstructing them a bit too much, and sometimes I will get like a big game. Like I remember a few years back when the God of War reboot came out. For some reason, I played it and like my brain managed to turn off, and had a really lovely like weekend just playing through that.
Totally.
But most of the time, my it's just that pattern recognition of like you're playing and then you're like, ah, this quest is like this, and they repeat these variables every single time. And then once your brain sees that, it like really ruins the kind of like the vibes, I guess. It just becomes so much like you realize you're pushing buttons, and that's not fun, I think.
Yeah, yeah, right. You want your hands to disappear and your gamepad to disappear, and you want to be in the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like the ideal, right? Is when you're not really thinking about yourself external to the game. I think it was a very fun experience. But I think there's also been some games that are like where you are kind of really aware of yourself separate from the game, and that can be also a really compelling experience sometimes.
Mm.
But you don't really see that in AAA games. I think you'll see that more in the indie space anyway. Uh, but yeah, I think that's why I play a lot more smaller indie like weird things, because it surprises me a lot more, and that helps me kind of like turn
Mm.
off my brain. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. Yeah. More experimental stuff and interesting things with indie space sometimes, right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's still very fun to be surprised by like big budget things. I think that's very like I'm often very impressed by it, because it's like takes a lot of effort to get something really like off the wall into a big budget game like that.
Yeah, it's totally understandable. It's indies can kind of afford to be more experimental, right? Just by nature of
Mhm.
being cheaper and leaner and faster.
Yeah, I know, definitely.
Yeah,
Uh, I can see why the things are the way they are, basically. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So I first discovered your work through a GDC talk. I a lot of times I have a hard time finding new games, but I'm obsessed with GDC, and so
Hmm.
I really enjoyed your talk, growing your code library with each new project. Um, Really cool. I have a bunch of questions about that. But first, I want to
Yeah.
hear about your game, right? That's really exciting. You had a successful Kickstarter. It's called Midautumn.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to hear all
Absolutely.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, so Mid-Autumn, I tell folks it's kind of like if you like Hades and you like Butterfly Soup or games like that, those are like you'll probably like this game. It's I tell people it's a supernatural game, and it's about kind of like Asian diaspora. It's about blasting evil spirits. It's about saving your hometown from gentrification. And you play as Robin Lamb, who is like this recent college grad, and they just moved into their grandma's house after college. Much like I think a lot of folks in the industry, they like went through college, finished. They didn't really have any jobs lined up, and so they were like, okay, what what am I going to do now? So they end up crashing with their grandmother, and they find out that spoilers, the spirit world is like real and exists, and if they want to stay in their grandma's house and pay rent, they have got to become the guardian of the spirit world. So it's kind of like this fun, fantastical premise, but we also use it to talk about like community and like culture, Asian diaspora, like and just this idea of like yeah, this small kind of community of like folks be facing like kind of big shifts, due to things like gentrification and stuff like that.
Very cool. That sounds awesome. I was looking at it. It's a beautiful game, really pretty artwork.
Thank you so much. No, our whole team is like super. They're always like killing it. I always have to tell everyone on the team because it is a small budget project. I have to tell folks to like do less work because everyone's always.
Oh,
It's a real
interesting.
blessing to have a team that's like really passionate and excited about what we're making. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it's really frustrating that be the person has to go like, but we'll keep it small. We'll keep this small. Do
Are you
less
finding
on
that?
this.
Do you have to be the person that keeps the scope down? Is that what you're finding?
I think when you're the project lead, you end up having to do that to some extent. I think also the main thing is I don't want folks to be overwhelmed. That's how I try to approach it. It's like, you know, I think I've been in the industry for some time now, and I've worked on like a number of different projects at different scales. And I think that a lot of the time, even in like the indie space, sometimes things can just be really, really like intense a lot of the time to like meet deadlines. Even when it's not like a studio that crunches or something like that. Sometimes there's just a lot of like intensity over getting stuff in. And I really try to approach things so that there's always fallbacks. There's always like, hey, if this doesn't happen or we don't get this asset in
Hmm.
time, we're just going to do this, and this is not going to be as good, but it's going to be acceptable. And trying to give folks the ability to say like, hey, I my pet's sick and I got to take him to the hospital or something like that, and to feel like that's an appropriate thing to say, and like to say, can I take more time on things? Because I find a lot of the time folks I work with are very, very they don't want to share things like that. They feel like it's not an appropriate thing to bring up
Mm.
and yeah, I really try to let folks, police themselves and let me know how much time and availability they have. And then
Awesome.
scope the game based on that, basically.
That's awesome. I wish you were everyone's manager. That's a really great way of looking at the time. I love
Well,
that.
I don't wish I was everyone's manager. I'm so tired. But
Yeah. That's a really good segue. I was curious about the team. Like how big's the team and what's everybody working on?
yeah, I would say the core team is maybe like 4 or 5 folks. We have a lot of collaborators. That's one of the ways we're able to do things. So everyone's got day jobs. Everyone has ways of like paying the bills, and that's also why like when you look at our like Kickstarter budget, it's a lot lower than like some other projects. It's just because a lot of it was like use it to pay for like the extra development that we're doing, and then we'll have jobs on top of it. But yeah, we have folks that we work with in terms of like helping us with some of the like limited voice acting that we have in the game. We have folks come in sometimes to help us with UI or with like specific animations. But I would say, yeah, it's just a lovely team. I'm happy to go into more detail on folks if that makes sense. But they're all amazing, and I'm always happy to shout them out.
That's great. Very cool. So what are you doing on the project? Is project lead, it sounds like. Are there other things that you're also doing, or are you
Yeah,
delegating all that?
I'm doing probably all the programming,
Oh wow.
and a lot of design. Basically, I do the stuff that I can't afford to pay people to do. So yeah, no, that's a big thing with this project. I mean, even before like I said about keeping the scope small, even with the art style, when I was starting out, it was like this has to be an art style that I could do in a pinch because
Mm,
you know it's just got to be something where folks have flexibility. So our lead pixel artist Kiana is really just like dumbing down her style a lot, so that it's something that like in if I had to, I could do it. I could do it like a really rough. It's not going to be as good as her version, but maybe I can like we can get it together enough to do it.
I love
And
that.
so there's like yeah, there's elements like that as well. So I'm sure there's stuff that I've touched in like other aspects, and they're all like worse than everyone else's things. But I try and hide it. I try and hide it so that people can enjoy the stuff that's really good, which is like why we bring like subject matter experts to do like the writing and do the art and do the
Right.
character portraits and do the sound. It's really yeah. So I guess to answer that actually, production,
For sure.
programming, and design is probably what I'm doing the most of.
Wow.
And then just like yeah, picking up things where I can.
I love that. Yeah. The adheres really well with your having fallbacks is your
Mm-hmm.
artist like toning it down a little bit so that you could fill the gaps. I absolutely love that. Um
Yeah, because that's the thing. If it was like if it was a more like ambitious art style, I'd say I think the art style is like gorgeous. I really love it. I love like a lot of the things you get to do with it, especially like with the kind of like lower pixel density. It
mhm.
makes our we can do a lot more crazy stuff with animation because of that or things like that. But yeah, it really is like my worst case scenario is like creating a game where if one person gets sick, then there's just a big like hole where like an asset needs to go, and it just doesn't exist.
That's great.
So yeah, that's. I think if things are cohesive, they just look better, even if it's like the player is not really going to think about that stuff. If it's something's um, if the visual bar is like at this level versus this level, but it's cohesive.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Mid-Autumn currently is in early access at the moment on Steam.
It's not in early access. We will be heading to early access.
Mm.
I don't have details on the date yet, but we're working on that. We're working on
I
when
love that.
that date's
Yeah.
gonna
No,
be.
don't commit
Yeah.
until you're ready. I love that. Yes, absolutely. And but like people can wishlist it today, correct?
People can wishlist it. It's currently on Steam. I encourage folks to go wishlist it, please. It really does help me, not just like in preparing for like an eventual early access launch, but like yeah, when I talk to folks about it, people ask me how many wishlists it has. So if you go and
Yeah.
wishlist it, it directly helps me today. So yeah.
Yeah, I follow the indie game marketing stuff, and I hear about those magic numbers, like the wish list numbers, where like you hear it's like 5,000 or something before the algorithm will promote you to certain categories, and like I hate that I just have to have that information in my brain these days to have a good path forward for indie sales and whatnot. But yeah, they're all out there, and like the wish lists are serious. Like people take those almost as seriously as the actual sales, right?
Yeah, well, because it is like there aren't really perfect predictors for like launch success,
Yeah.
but that's probably the closest thing we have. And then I think there are some folks who just look at like raw wish list numbers, and then there are folks who really try and look at like organic wish list numbers, which is just like
Mm,
the daily kind of like drip of wish lists that you get. Some folks
right.
think that's more important because wish lists obviously you can get a huge bunch from like an event or something like that, and then people might not actually be excited like about the game on average. So I don't know. I don't actually know which is true. I just know that those are
Yeah.
potentially both true.
Yeah. It's all very hand wavy.
Yeah.
Very interesting. You're going for early access. Did you how did you arrive there? Um,
Yeah, I think that we kind of always wanted to do early access. And the reason for that is that I think it's I recognize that our game is actually quite ambitious in terms of when you're making a like a roguelite or anything like that or a dungeon crawler, there's just so many variables, like whether that's like power-ups or like, boons or gifts or all those things, and they all kind of like have to interact and be balanced. And that's the big thing is really like there's no way for me even doing play tests, even like, preparing for that to really see how broken everything is until it's like out at a much wider scale. So the
true.
plan for us is that when we're going to do a beta like for our Kickstarter backers, and we're going to do stuff there. And then the plan is to put it out into early access. And then at that point, like there's going to be a lot of iteration in terms of like, okay, what's actually popular? What's not popular? What can we make the stuff that's like feels weak or it doesn't feel as good? Can we make that more compelling? So that when we get to what will be our like 1.0 launch or something, that people play it and then that experience is like, oh, it's so cool how all these pieces link into each other. Like I don't think you get to that point without a ton of testing. So that's why early access for me.
Oh, I love that. So it's kind of like you plan on going full into that, knowing you're going to get a ton of feedback, and so you're planning that into your development. So you will definitely keep like early access will be like a learning
Yeah,
uh
absolutely.
path.
Like I think we're making our best guesses, with things, and that's kind of the nice thing is that the way I approach things is that it's okay for some things to be broken in some ways. Like I think like it's
Mm,
okay for like if everything is equally effective, if every build is equally effective, I think that feels kind of boring. It is fun for players to go, oh, this one is like like slightly stronger, this one's slightly weaker, but then to also have some players who are like, well, that's true for most players, but for me, this one that is technically weaker in the meta or something is like I'm really good at this for some reason. And I think that really helps create a sense of identity for players in your game. Like I think that's really
mm.
fun, for players to be like, oh, I'm going against the grain and doing this, and I'm good at it anyway. And I think you kind of lose that when everything's super, super like even all the time.
Yeah, a little bit of asymmetry or imbalance is good,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you kind of almost like a roller coaster. You kind of want those ups and downs.
Yeah, I just think it's more interesting overall, I think, for
I like
players to
that.
experience.
Yeah. I saw Derek Yu of Spelunky fame was talking about game designs that are spiky, that have these
Mm-hmm.
big moments of pain, but then a real shallow, calm moment of just like serenity or something. And I like that a lot. Like I want something with big feelings.
Yeah, no, that's like I totally like agree with that. I think that's what you remember, right? I think if a game gives you a lot of like really smooth kind of like tension and things like that, I think it's hard for you to point to specific moments in the game. And so that's the thing like I want to help players with as well,
Mm,
is to be like, here's a moment, boom, you're gonna remember this moment. And when you talk to someone about the game, they're like, what's it like? That's what you can like, talk about. And you get to
right.
like yeah, you get to like verbalize what you're excited about.
Yeah, very cool. Um, you said something earlier. I know this is taking a little bit of a step back, but
Mhm.
something interests me a lot is you're talking about pixel density and resolution, and then something in the indie space. Like the lines get blurred a lot, right? If a
Yeah,
game is
okay.
a certain resolution, or how to decide what size to make your assets. I think this is a really interesting question for you, especially because you have a Kickstarter budget and you have a team, and you have to like it really matters if you're going to change your size from 16 by 16 to 32 by 32 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just curious, like how do you how do you land there? How do you decide it's going to be this will be pixel art and this won't, or what the resolution will be, and all of that?
That's a great question, because I do think we've decided like some things will be pixel art, some things won't.
Hmm.
And I think some folks might disagree with me. I think there are a number of things I think about. One is that I look at things in terms of like what do we get for it, right? So one of the things is folks who are less familiar with like pixel art might not realize this, but as you go like up in like 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit, it actually like exponentially increases the complexity of
Oh yeah.
the drawing, which is really interesting. And I think becomes less apparent when you're just kind of like drawing freehand, not pixel art style. It's less of a consideration. But with pixel art to look good, there's a lot of ways to do pixel art that looks incohesive. So it really does like increase that. So for us, going like smaller helps us in terms of like being able to do more variety, more interesting things, more robust animations. But it's not all a strength because going smaller is sometimes hard. Sometimes it's like I have like 8 pixels to make this look like a person, and or like here's a person, they have to like drink a cup of tea, but I don't. If I move it this arm 1 pixel, it looks like they're like raising their hand.
Yeah.
That's super hard in its own way.
Hmm.
So it's not a purely easy thing. So that's a thing folks have to consider. And like readability is also a thing. The lower pixel density you go, it becomes harder to make things readable. And that's also one of the reasons why our character portraits, for example, are really they're not pixel art. They're like high density because I think when you're working with like things that are lower resolution, one of the things that a lot of old retro games did and had that was like really helpful was they would have the box art and they would have like the manuals, and those would be like in
Mm.
like really like high fidelity things because you're trying to anchor something in the audience's mind of like that's what this looks like, that's what I'm looking at,
Right.
and that does a lot of heavy lifting for you. And yeah, I think especially with making something that has like visual novel elements or like narratively driven games, thinking about what folks will care about the most. So we were like, I think folks will really want character portraits that are like as high fidelity as possible, but I don't think they will mind as much if the characters look a bit more pixely and things like that, because it's where their attention lies, and what they're using to get enjoyment out of the game. And that obviously has a is a trade-off, right? Like different audiences have different expectations, different for different genres. And I think what I was trying to do was signal to folks that this is a more narrative game, and that folks who like that will like
Mm.
vibe with this. Because I
Right.
really don't want to like trick anyone into playing a game, right? I don't want anyone to come in and be like,
Good.
this is exactly like Hades or something, and then go in and be like, I don't like this. So I want to really try and give folks as soon as possible, if there's a thing that will turn them off about the game, because they probably won't like the game, I want to like give that to them front and center and be
Mm.
like, this is what the game is. We're unapologetic about that. And like, if you try it and you enjoy it, great. But if I'm warning you, I'm warning you, this is what the game is, and be aware of that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I saw a tip along those lines recently, which was kind of like a disclaimer on a Steam page.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so useful these days because Steam has just who even can count how many millions of users are sometimes just
Mhm.
getting dumped onto a page, and like a lot, especially with so many indies making so many niche games these days, a lot of them are not for everybody, right? Like
Mhm.
no game is really for everybody, and more and more they're not even for you anymore. You're like you'll be like, it's a turn-based tactics game. That's for me. And it's like, no, not this one. This is a hyper casual turn-based tactics game with, steampunk aesthetics. You hate those things. So more and more, yeah, I found that it's almost like a shield, right? I think is the analogy I heard is like you almost want that on your Steam page to be like, leave now. We don't want
Yeah,
everyone.
it's almost like, yeah, like I feel like I'm almost like negging our audience to some extent. So it's just like, if you're here, like you've gotten through me saying like, are you sure you want to play the game? And I think at that point they're like primed, and just making sure, I think that's helpful to a lot of folks, to make sure that they're in a space where they're ready to enjoy the game as well. And I think it
Mm,
helps them just have a more positive experience. Even folks who are more like apprehensive, at least know like, okay, well, these are the elements I'm probably not going to like about the game, and they have that in their mind. And sometimes maybe it surprises them and they're having a good time. But I think that that's helpful for folks going in to just set expectations.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Yeah, I'm sure your Steam page is going to do really well with you keeping things like that in mind. Um, I think everybody listening should go Steam wish list Mid-Autumn on Steam. I would like to get into your awesome GDC talk, which I
Yeah,
also recommend
absolutely.
everybody watch. I have a specific question. I think there's a bunch of great stuff in there. I would just say, anyone go watch it. Seriously, like I know I recommend a lot of things, but this is a really good one. Like, congrats, dude.
Thank
Um,
you. No, thank you.
so a question for me, specifically, if you don't mind, is something I struggle with a lot is I'll have two tech stacks, right? Like right
Hmm.
now, I've got a significant Unity tech stack I've spent years cultivating, and I call it my workshop. It's very precious to me. It's valuable. I've spent hundreds
Hmm.
of who even knows the hours melt away. It's important, and I built a lot of time and effort into it. But then I also have other stacks, and I'm sure people listening will have their own stacks, maybe like Python or Love 2D or Unreal or Godot or whatever.
Hmm.
Mine is I like to write largely from scratch. I'll make like JavaScript based HTML5 games you can play in your browser or wrap them up or whatever. Um, so I thought this might be a good question for you because it's like, I'd like to adhere by the things you recommend, which is like gathering your assets and your code and stuff. But what I struggle with sometimes is I'll have like a great menu system that I've built in web tech, and then
Hmm.
I'll have like I don't know how to shove it into Unity, and I don't think there's a great answer, like an easy answer other than like rewriting everything, which takes a lot of time. But I was wondering if you stumble upon, especially as a doing a bunch of freelance work, I would imagine sometimes the tech stacks are like kind of out there. But yeah, any advice for how you handle like incompatible libraries, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's like it's not a great scenario, right? For when you want to do that, when you want to, you
Mm-hmm.
have this thing that's like, I really need this in this project, but it's in the wrong format, it's in the wrong programming language, it's just in the wrong
Mm-hmm.
stack. Yeah. So I think the way that I typically address those scenarios is if I was working on like a contract, I might say like I need like I might budget more time into something and just be like, this is the time that I'm going to take to convert this. And this might still be less time than writing it entirely from scratch, but that's also can be a gamble, because it
Mm.
might just be you might just be approaching it in the wrong way because all of these different engines or whatever have assumptions that they make about how you do things, and so some things might just require you to rethink things. But I think what I try to do when I'm trying to convert something is I try to first take a step back in terms of like the actual like implementation. I really just think of it in terms of like pseudocode or like high level, what's happening, what do I want to happen in terms of the logic. And then I try and think of yeah, let's say like I have something in Unity and I'm trying to go to Unreal, and let's say I want to use like blueprints to make it, but for some reason, and I don't want to use C# or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would be like, here's the logic of what I want to happen. That's usually something that you understand to some extent about the code, and then you start to try and approach it from the like way that the engine tries to do it. And I would start there. I would start trying to make it like the first steps, and as you do that, it's almost like the process I would imagine is you go into like one end, you start there, and I would always start from the target um, platform or engine or something, and you start there, and then you go back and you look at something and you see if there's like something that can just slot in here because there might be um, in terms of like, oh, okay, this next bit is really easy to fit, and this like can basically be copy pasted over, and it'll fit into like this part of it, and this part might not be. So let's just not ignore that part, do that part from scratch, and so that's what I would imagine is like you basically build like a foundation, thinking about it from a high level sense, and then that foundation will have like here are the places where the next bits of code should should fit in, and then you
Mm.
can think of it as smaller pieces basically, and that should minimize time where instead of doing it all from scratch you'll find out like, oh, okay, I could only reuse these two pieces here, but that still saved me some time. And if you get lucky and you're like, oh, okay, here's like 10 sub modules or something, and I was
Mm-hmm.
able to reuse all of them, excellent, saved me a lot of time. And even in that case, if you realize like, oh, there's nothing I can reuse, you're still using existing thing as like a framework of like where I need to go next and what I need to implement next.
Mm,
And that should still save you some time, like ideally. There's
yeah.
definitely a worst case scenario where you try to do this and it just like fails and it does take longer. But I think that's the main thing. I think the thing that trips up a lot of people, depending on like, it might be different based on people's personalities, but I find that I personally, when I try to start by like looking at what I already have and then trying to move it over, I think that trips me up. Whereas when I start with like looking at it, getting a sense of how it works, starting in the target like code base, and then adding things, I think that tends to work better for me.
I love that. That's really cool. Yeah, I like the idea of using your other code base, which maybe is incompatible, but as pseudocode, because a lot of times, I mean, you know, the idea being that you can read that code really well because it's something you've built yourself. It's in your workshop. I've noticed something that I do a lot is I'll like when I'm working in Unity, I'll refer to my HTML5 games for the math stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I know I can't use the code. I wish I could just copy paste this, but I'll at least be like, oh, right, it's cosine, not sine. Okay, blah blah blah, and I'll just have that as a reference at least. Um,
Yeah, no, I think it's very helpful. Like just in terms of like, oh, here's like oh, this particular way I set up like a for loop or something like that. And you
mm,
look at it and you're like, oh, of course. I can just that kind of stuff's so easy to paste over. And that is like an opportunity to speed things up. Yeah, definitely. That the math, the use of like logic is really easy to like move over.
yeah,
Um,
I love that. That's a pretty good segue into something I'm interested in, which is what tools you're using and anything that you like or hate recently. It sounds like you're using Unity for Midautumn.
I'm using Unity. A thing folks might be surprised by is that I'm actually using Unity 2018. I work in older versions of Unity
Yeah.
because the newer versions, I teach in newer versions of Unity. So I don't get me wrong, I like a lot of the features. I just find there that with it's not true of all engines, but Unity in particular, I often wait until some time has passed before I try something in a new version because there's just a lot of like kinks to work out when a new version launches.
Yeah.
And I started Midautumn in 2018. Well, not sorry, I didn't start it in the year 2018. I started in the version of 2018.
Hmm.
And then I was like, am I going to need to upgrade it? Probably not. There's probably not any features that I couldn't like get to work here.
Mm.
Uh, because I've done both. I've worked at studios that literally were operated on the like latest version of the engine at all times and would always update. I've worked at studios that didn't update. I've worked at studios that have done a mix, and just my personal preference is I just think it's a lot more stable to just know what the limitations of something is and what you can and can't do, and just like decide this is out of scope, this is in scope. We can use a workaround here.
Mm.
And at this point, yeah, like 2018, 2019, those are ones that I'm super familiar with. 2020 I've been using. I haven't used like the latest version that much. But yeah, that's what I'm using for Midautumn specifically.
Very interesting. Yeah, I've noticed sometimes like I would just update all the time, but then I'll get like some news, and I'm sure you've heard some things about Unity that gets you kind of scratching your head at least, and you're like, what? And then my strategy of just always being on the latest and greatest, I was like, that's probably not great. So I'm just gonna lock it down here on this version that works, and I haven't updated in a while. I'm on 2020 right now, I think.
Yeah, so I'm pretty extreme in terms of how far back I use
I
it.
love that.
You can definitely make games right in 2020. Like I don't even need to tell anyone because obviously people are like shipping games in it already.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I like that stability. I just like not having to worry, not having to be like, but because also there are some times where I've been in a studio and you have that uncertainty of like, oh, should we fix this? Oh, this is a problem with the engine itself, but it might get fixed. And so sometimes you wait and just see, is it going to get fixed? And I like knowing like this is just going to be broken forever, so I need to figure something out.
Mm.
And that certainty saves me a lot of time, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, because the external dependency basically it's a maybe never, right? Like even if they're like we're going to fix that next launch, who knows if they will, right? You might be waiting months, and a lot of times we can't afford to do that, right?
Yeah, and I just think it's a like it's a logic trap of like, but if we wait and it gets fixed, it's the best scenario. And so oftentimes you'll make that call, and sometimes it is the best. That's the problem. Sometimes waiting was the best
Yeah.
call.
Oh, that's
Uh,
rough, right? I've noticed that with like I was working in HTML5 games exclusively in my early career around 2010 or so,
mhm,
and then I put it down for a long time to go work on for other companies and also Unity stuff. So I picked it back up recently, and it almost is like that waiting thing where now all of a sudden I have things I've always wanted, like import all these new features in the language. I'm like, you can just do this now. Like I used to have to use like a flood fill or something for
mhm.
that, but now I can just use these cool new features.
Yeah, no, for me, I was like,
Or polyfill, I meant.
once nested prefabs were possible in Unity, I was like, probably
Ooh,
okay. I'm
that was a
probably
good update.
okay. That's like that was when I like was like definitely update for that. And then
That was a
after
really
that, I
good
was
one.
like, yeah. But essentially, yeah, every time there is a new version of Unity, like I do take a look and I do look at the features, and sometimes I'll do like a cost benefit analysis. Probably not for Midautumn because Midautumn's like in 2018 at this point, and that would be a ridiculous thing to jump through. But that's basically what happened. Was like 2019. I looked at it, was like, I think we can survive without these features. 2020, I was like, I think we can survive, and I do it based on the project. So some
Mm,
projects I would absolutely roll up in like a newer version of the engine. It's really
right.
just like that. A lot of the stuff that's happening in Midautumn is actually surprisingly low tech. There's just a lot of it, basically. Like, it's procedural narrative, but procedural narrative is really just like there's a lot of text and you just pick the right one and you put it out, and that doesn't really require that much like extreme features. It's just like you can just write that, and as long as you know what you're doing, it will work.
I love that. Yeah, you can just write that. Yeah, I think we forget that sometimes, right? Like the tools are really cool sometimes and the UI is nice. You're like, I want to use that tool, but it's like sometimes you don't need it. You don't need to wait for it. You can just do it. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I'm a big proponent of sometimes doing it the dumb way is fine, and just like it will like save you time to do it the
mm,
dumb
I like that. So just a couple more questions for you, and
way.
these are fun ones. Here's one I like to ask because it gives you people a good idea of what kind of gamer you are. Is so let's say you're a scenario where you're going to a desert island or a cabin in
Hmm.
the woods or a secluded vacation for a month or however long you wanted for your favorite games, like a handful, right? Like what are
Hmm.
some of your top old classics or new ones you just will take with you forever, 3 or 5 or just some of your favorite games.
Ooh, okay. Let me think. So,
Putting you on the spot here, I know.
oh no, there's definitely things I can suggest. I think the thing that I'm a weird like stan of is always been the Fable games, like
Mm,
the Lost Chapters especially. That's my favorite one, just because it's got like a really nice, like kind of whimsical vibe. I just really enjoy being in that world. But I also really liked two and three. I'm a very like easily entertained gamer. So like here's the thing. I love the Bioware games.
mm,
And I love like I've enjoyed every single like Mass Effect game. Even like the I remember like the ending of three was like super super controversial. But I had no idea until I went on the internet because I played three and I was like very satisfied, had a good time, went to log on the internet, and I was like, no, I get it, I get the criticisms, but also it had no effect on my enjoyment of the game. I just had a good time.
that's good. Yeah.
Those, yeah, a lot of the Bioware games for sure. What else? I feel like I really like a lot of the Dark Souls, Bloodborne type games. Those
Mm-hmm.
are just fun to like. Um, I really like a lot of small games, but I also have like having one or two really big games to kind of just like whittle away at, and those are really fun
Mm.
games to kind of just spend time in and kind of like make incremental progress. Um, I don't know. I feel like maybe I could keep going. I don't know how. I don't
Those
know
are
what
good ones.
limit I have. I've like put like here's two franchises, these three
Yeah.
franchises, but
Yeah.
I
I
could definitely those would probably be like my first choices. But I love lots of different types of games. Like I love like character action games. There was a time when I was like really into first person shooters, and I'm not so much now, but that doesn't mean like I've just played a lot of them. That's it. Like I've played
Right.
enough probably to enjoy them. And I also love like little turn-based games. I remember really enjoying like the Banner Saga a while back when
Oh,
it
good
came
one.
out. Just like yeah, I'm just trying to think of games I had a fun weekend play or something like
Yeah.
that.
Nice. Those are really good picks.
Yeah.
Love it. Lastly, this is a fun one. Have you ever made a game all by yourself? If you have, what are they? And if not, have you thought about what you would?
All by myself. Let me think.
Putting you on the spot again. I'm
I
sorry.
mean, one that's like one that's like exists.
Really?
I don't know if there's one that like exists somewhere. I feel like maybe I'm being needlessly like rigid in that, but I feel like I've gotten help on most things that I've made at some
I think
point.
that's okay. I usually get help. Like
Yeah,
one of my games, I did everything except like I used assets for the sound effects, and then I just used an unrelated album of music my friend had released. Right. So
yeah,
like someday I do want to do every single piece, like whatever that means. But like, I think it counts if you're the person who's getting most of the stuff done. I mean, you should credit people, right? But like
yeah.
once in a while, you'll have like a friend who made you like an icon, and like, yeah, totally credit them. But like, you made the game, right?
Yeah, no, I think most of the stuff that I've done solo would have been like small game jam stuff.
Oh, fun.
I like collaborating, so I think that's a thing that I enjoy doing with larger
Yeah.
projects. Also, it's easier to spend money. It's easier to spend money when it's other people as opposed to like when it's just me and I have to go like, is this good? And then just
I
ask
agree
myself.
with you.
So,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
that's a harder call to make. It's much easier to have people on your team telling you like, no, 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 this is good, and then you go like, cool, I'll spend money here. Whereas when you're doing solo projects, like I do a lot of my prototyping solo. Like I
Mm,
said, I try to make a game that I could feasibly make a version
yeah.
of myself, but it wouldn't be as good. So like when I was prototyping Midautumn, that was basically like the first few months or so I was doing everything, and then we would bring people on, and so I definitely enjoy making games by myself. I think as I when I add budget to things, usually what I spend it on is bringing folks in to help. And
Love
definitely,
that.
I don't know, like some of like the first things I made in like when I was learning games would also count as like solo projects or things like that.
Yeah, I bet you've got a bunch, back in the day. I've got a friend who's like, kind of has a bunch of games like that he made and they're just kind of lost. I've got a bunch of games. I still have them on disc that were made in QBasic, right? Which was a app
Yeah,
that worked in
definitely.
like the 90s, but I can't get them to run anymore. I should
No, I think the
download
first
DOSBox or
stuff I was
something.
started making was like in Flash, probably in ActionScript and
Ooh,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, I was probably like in high school or something, just being like, I'm gonna learn how to make Flash games.
I love that.
And they're not good. They're not very good.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yes. I love that. Awesome. Oh man,
But
these are
yeah,
great answers. This has been very educational for me, and I really appreciate being here today.
yeah, no, absolutely. It's always great to chat with folks, and it's a lot of fun now.
Thanks for listening. Head over to Midautumn on Steam and give it a wish list if it looks cool to you. Hey, a quick couple thoughts about making big indie games. First off, thanks for checking it out. Once the launch price ended, I wanted to keep it going, so I extended it another week and then decided to just stick with that launch sale price. I know it's a big ask, and anyone listening to me knows there's an ocean of free game dev content on YouTube and a million other websites. So it's a premium package designed to show your support for me and what I'm doing, and I really appreciate that. You are being played out by After the End, which you are free to use in your own projects. Now it's time for you to go make the game.